The political landscape, both domestic and international, is currently a maelstrom of high-stakes negotiations and unfolding crises, with President Donald Trump at the epicenter of many pivotal developments. As Republicans race against a self-imposed July 4 deadline to advance the president's sweeping agenda bill, a fragile ceasefire in the Middle East is testing the limits of diplomacy, while the U.S. Supreme Court has delivered another significant victory for the administration, underscoring a period of intense activity and profound implications. On Capitol Hill, the legislative clock is ticking loudly for President Trump's Big Beautiful Bill, a colossal package encompassing significant tax reforms and immigration policies. The Senate is currently embroiled in a debate over a raft of amendments reflecting the complex and often contentious nature of such comprehensive legislation. This intense push, driven by the president's stated desire to see the bill passed by Independence Day, highlights the administration's determination to secure key policy wins amidst a busy legislative calendar. Simultaneously, the Supreme Court has concluded its term, marking another triumph for President Trump. Though details of the specific ruling remain sparse, it nonetheless contributes to a narrative of judicial success for his administration. However, the domestic political theater is only one facet of a broader global narrative. The Middle East remains a crucible of tension even after a hard-won ceasefire brought a halt to a tumultuous 12-day conflict between Israel and Iran. This fragile peace is now being tested by conflicting signals regarding future diplomatic engagements. President Trump, despite last week raising the prospect of renewed nuclear talks with Tehran, declared early Monday that he is not offering Iran anything and is not even talking to them since we totally obliterated their nuclear facilities. This firm stance comes in direct response to suggestions from Democratic Senator Chris Coons, who, speaking on Fox News, referenced reports indicating the White House might be considering sanctions relief for Iran as part of new negotiations, echoing elements of the Obama-era Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action (JCPOA). Trump vehemently pushed back on these claims via social media, reiterating his disinterest in a deal similar to his predecessors. Adding further layers of complexity, an early intelligence report suggested that the U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities may have only set Tehran's nuclear program back by a matter of months. A contention the administration has consistently pushed back on. This assessment complicates any long-term strategy for containment. The geopolitical temperature was further raised when two Iranian Grand Ayatollahs, Hossein Nouri Hamdani and Nazir Makarem Shirazi, issued separate fatwas on Sunday declaring that any insult, threat or aggression against Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei constitutes waging war against God, a crime punishable by execution under Iran's Islamic law. These declarations, widely published in Iranian media, did not name specific foreign leaders but arrived swiftly after President Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had reportedly discussed the possibility of killing Khamenei during the recent conflict. Human rights activists have voiced significant concern over these fatwas, particularly as they extended the ruling to anyone assisting governments or individuals threatening Khamenei, potentially broadening the scope of what is considered a capital offense. Amidst these escalating tensions, international diplomatic efforts are underway to stabilize the region. French President Emmanuel Macron confirmed via a post on X that he had spoken with Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian, urging Tehran to return to the negotiating table, respect for the ceasefire, and help restore peace in the region. Macron specifically pressed for Iran to uphold its commitments under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and facilitate the swift resumption of the IAEA's work in Iran to ensure full transparency regarding its nuclear activities. Concurrently, a top Israeli official, Minister for Strategic Affairs Ron Dermer, is slated to arrive in Washington, D.C. for talks with the Trump administration. His visit is expected to encompass discussions on the ongoing conflict in the Gaza Strip, the recent hostilities with Iran, and preparations for Prime Minister Netanyahu's planned visit to the White House next month. The confluence of these events paints a vivid picture of a world navigating complex political and diplomatic challenges. The immediate future will likely see continued intense debate in the Senate over Trump's legislative agenda, a critical test of his administration's ability to deliver on campaign promises. Internationally, the fragile Israel-Iran ceasefire remains precarious, dependent on the delicate balance of rhetoric and action from all parties. The coming days will be crucial in determining whether diplomatic channels can de-escalate the heightened tensions, especially concerning Iran's nuclear ambitions and the implications of the religious decrees from Tehran. The high-level visits and ongoing negotiations suggest a concerted effort to manage these multifaceted crises. But the path to lasting stability remains fraught with significant obstacles. As the nation hurtles towards the Independence Day deadline, Washington finds itself gripped by a high-stakes legislative battle, with Senate Republicans racing to pass what President Trump has dubbed his One Big Beautiful Bill. This sprawling 940-page legislative package, central to the president's first-year agenda, aims to cement his legacy by extending significant tax cuts, boosting border security, and increasing military spending, all while navigating fierce bipartisan opposition and growing internal dissent. The contentious bill, which has been the subject of marathon weekend sessions and intense debate, is a complex tapestry woven from disparate policy threads. At its core, it seeks to extend nearly $4 trillion in tax cuts first enacted in 2017, partially offsetting these by slashing spending on critical safety net programs. Senator Lindsey Graham, the South Carolina Republican and Budget Committee chairman, championed the measure, stating, "We are going to make the tax cuts permanent so your taxes do not go up in December." The legislation also earmarks substantial investments in border security and military funding, aligning with key priorities of both congressional Republicans and the White House. Republicans contend that the bill serves as a vital economic stimulus, preventing massive tax hikes for taxpayers across all income groups, with Senator Mike Crapo, chairman of the Finance Committee, noting that without it, $2.6 trillion of the burden would fall on those making less than $400,000 per year. He further highlighted over $600 billion in new tax relief specifically for low and middle-income families and workers, including deductions for tips and overtime, an expanded child tax credit, and a larger standard deduction for older Americans and new U.S.-made car buyers. However, the fiscal implications of the bill have ignited a firestorm of criticism. A nonpartisan estimate from the Congressional Budget Office (CBO) projects that the bill would add an estimated $3.3 trillion to the nation's debt over a decade, a figure approximately $800 billion higher than the version passed by the House of Representatives last month. This substantial increase in the $36.2 trillion federal debt has fueled accusations of fiscal irresponsibility. Democratic Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer did not mince words, accusing Republicans of deploying fake math and accounting gimmicks to hide the true cost of the bill. Senator Ron Wyden of Oregon, the senior Democrat on the Finance Committee, echoed this sentiment, asserting it is fakery. The budget numbers are a fraud, but the deficits will be very real. The prospect of a catastrophic debt spiral is very real. Republicans, however, unilaterally asserted that the tax cuts would not add to federal deficits since they are already in place, a departure from traditional congressional accounting practices for expiring tax provisions. The bill's proposed cuts, particularly the nearly $1 trillion reduction to Medicaid and other federal nutrition programs, have proven to be a significant flashpoint, stirring uneasiness among several Republicans and drawing fierce opposition from Democrats. The Senate only narrowly advanced the measure in a procedural vote late on Saturday, with a slim 51-49 margin to open debate. This tight vote underscores the fragility of Republican support, as they can only afford to lose 3 GOP votes for the bill's passage. One of the most prominent dissenting voices came from Senator Thom Tillis of North Carolina, who announced on Sunday that he would not seek re-election next year following a harsh attack from President Trump over his opposition to the bill. Tillis, one of 2 Republicans who initially voted to block the bill, delivered a powerful speech explaining his stance, directly challenging the White House's advice on Medicaid cuts. "What do I tell 66,300 people in 2 years, 3 years, when President Trump breaks his promise by pushing them off of Medicaid because the funding's not there anymore?" Tillis questioned, referring to his constituents. His decision not to run again after Trump's public threat to back a primary challenger was celebrated by the president as great news, on Truth Social, where Trump also issued a stark warning to other hesitant Republicans: remember, you still have to get re-elected. Don't go too crazy. Tillis's North Carolina seat is widely considered one of the most vulnerable Republican Senate seats in next year's midterm elections. Adding to the internal criticism, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky scoffed at claims that the plan would not significantly add to the federal debt, noting the bill includes a $5 trillion increase in the federal debt limit. That is an admission that they know they are not controlling the deficit, Paul stated. As senators prepared for a marathon series of rapid-fire votes on Monday morning, the legislative process promised further drama. Many of the proposed amendments are Democratic initiatives strategically designed to impose maximum political pain on Republicans as they push through a measure unpopular with the public. However, some amendments could genuinely reshape the package, including one from Senator Rick Scott of Florida that would dramatically scale back the Medicaid expansion implemented through the Affordable Care Act. This proposal, which would lower the federal government's share of medical bills for childless adult Medicaid beneficiaries after 2030, has been pressed by deficit hawks but staunchly opposed by Republicans from politically competitive states, with Speaker Mike Johnson having previously promised his members he would not pursue it. Even if Senate Republicans manage to narrowly push the bill through, its fate remains uncertain in the House of Representatives. Hard-right conservatives in the House have already raised concerns about the deficit impact, and others have objected to the Medicaid cuts in the Senate measure, which are notably deeper than those approved by the House last month. As the July 4th deadline looms, the political maneuvering and legislative wrangling over this monumental bill will undoubtedly continue to dominate the national discourse, shaping not only President Trump's legacy but also the economic landscape and the future of healthcare and social programs across the United States. In an era where technological prowess increasingly dictates geopolitical standing, the intricate web of defense funding, academic research, and national policy is coming under sharper scrutiny. A recent investigation by Wisconsin Watch has shed light on the significant financial ties between leading academic institutions like the University of Wisconsin-Madison and the U.S. Department of Defense, revealing a substantial investment in research aimed at bolstering national security while simultaneously highlighting the contentious fiscal debates surrounding such collaborations. The University of Wisconsin-Madison, a research powerhouse, currently holds 198 active Department of Defense awards, cumulatively valued at an impressive $221.3 million. This funding, as detailed in UW-Madison's declaration from the Association of American Universities lawsuit against the Department of Defense, is channeled into research critical for expanding warfighter capabilities and enhancing the U.S.'s strategic and tactical advantage. For the 2023-24 fiscal year, the Department of Defense awarded $67.4 million in grants to UW-Madison, constituting 8% of the university's total agency funding and marking it as the fourth highest source after the National Institutes of Health, the National Science Foundation, and the Department of Energy. This underscores the military's vital role in the university's research ecosystem, especially considering UW-Madison's national standing as sixth in research expenditures, exceeding $1.7 billion in its latest annual review. The scope of this defense-funded research is broad and directly relevant to military advancements. UW-Madison Vice-Chancellor for Research Dorota A. Grejner-Brzezinska noted in the lawsuit that these awards support critical fields such as cybersecurity, maritime navigation, materials science, injury prevention and recovery, and military flight technology. Specific projects include a group of 30 scientists dedicated to studying traumatic brain injuries, as well as research into satellite data systems and artificial intelligence infrastructure. The university is also actively pursuing further defense funding, with 81 pending grant proposals as of June 13, 2025, requesting a combined budget of $70.5 million. In stark contrast, Madison College, another prominent educational institution in the region, currently has no active defense awards or grants. A central point of contention in these collaborations revolves around the reimbursement of indirect costs. These are the essential yet non-specific expenses that underpin research. encompassing costs for building maintenance, utilities, procurement of shared equipment, administrative services, information technology, libraries, and compliance with federal regulations, as explained by Grechner-Brzezinska. The Trump administration's Department of Defense had sought to cap these indirect costs at 15%, a move that universities vehemently opposed. Grechner-Brzezinska warned that such a cap would render most, if not all, of UW-Madison's proposed and ongoing research projects infeasible. This concern led to a lawsuit by the Association of American Universities, culminating in a federal judge in Boston temporarily granting universities a restraining order on June 17, 2025, allowing them to temporarily operate with the previously negotiated indirect cost reimbursement rates of 55.5%. This legal victory mirrors a similar outcome where a federal judge blocked a 15% cap by the National Institutes of Health, highlighting a broader struggle between federal agencies and academic institutions over the financial sustainability of research. Beyond the university level, the drive for increased defense spending is a global phenomenon, often amplified by calls from the U.S. administration. The Trump administration has notably pressured allies to boost their military outlays. NATO, for instance, has responded by raising its defense spending objective from 2% of gross domestic product to 5% for member nations, though only about 20 of 32 members have achieved the previous 2% goal, reflecting diverse threat perceptions and fiscal capacities. In Asia particularly, the U.S. has indicated a similar need for increased contributions from allies like Japan. Japan's defense spending, historically maintained at around 1% of GDP in the post-war era, has seen a significant shift. In late 2022, then Prime Minister Fumio Kishida announced a comprehensive strengthening of defense capabilities aiming to increase defense spending, including related expenses, to 2% of GDP over 5 years. The current fiscal year budget already sees defense spending at 9.9 trillion yen, $68.6 billion, or 1.8% of GDP. However, reports suggest that Washington has informally requested Japan to set an even higher specific numerical goal of 3.5% of GDP for defense spending, excluding related expenses. This request has been met with strong pushback. An editorial from the Asahi Shimbun on June 30, 2025 described the request as outrageous, asserting that Japan must play the leading role in determining the scale of its defense capabilities. The editorial criticized the Kishida cabinet for insufficient Diet deliberations and for deferring decisions on securing stable revenue sources, raising concerns about the inclusion of equipment with dubious cost-effectiveness. Current Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has echoed this sentiment, stating that while greater communication with the United States is needed, Japan will decide its requirements without being bound by a predetermined monetary amount. The broader context for this global defense buildup is the evolving geopolitical landscape, particularly in East Asia, where China's maritime expansion and defense modernization, coupled with North Korea's development of nuclear weapons and missiles, present clear security challenges. There's also an acknowledgement among allies that they must augment the relative decline in the national strength of the United States. However, expanding defense spending beyond sustainable levels risks creating greater instability in daily life due to potential tax increases and could spark an endless arms race with neighboring nations, potentially damaging regional stability. As such, a comprehensive strategy that balances diplomatic efforts with strengthened deterrence is paramount. The interplay between academic research, defense funding, and geopolitical strategy is becoming increasingly complex. Universities as centers of innovation are crucial partners in developing the advanced technologies vital for national security. Yet the financial terms of these partnerships, particularly regarding indirect costs, remain a point of friction. Simultaneously, allied nations grapple with the economic and political implications of meeting rising defense spending targets under U.S. pressure, highlighting the need for sovereign decision-making and sustainable fiscal planning. As global security dynamics continue to shift, the ongoing dialogue between governments, defense agencies, and academic institutions will be critical in shaping not only the future of defense technology but also the very fabric of international relations and national economies. The global diplomatic landscape is undergoing a profound transformation as a distinctive and often unpredictable approach to international relations takes center stage during President Donald Trump's second term. Far from adhering to conventional diplomatic norms, this emerging Trump doctrine leverages shock assertive demands and a willingness to employ both economic and military leverage, fundamentally reshaping alliances and challenging long-held geopolitical assumptions. An analysis published by Geopolitical Futures on June 30, 2025, penned by George Friedman, outlines a clear model for Trump's diplomacy. It typically begins with radical demands placed on other nations, followed by calls for negotiation. Should these talks falter or fail to yield accommodation, punitive action ensues, often punctuated by alternating threats and surprising praise for adversaries. This strategy, Friedman notes, was recently exemplified in the episode with Iran, where demands to abandon its nuclear program were followed by indirect negotiations, a deadline, and ultimately dramatic military action in the form of airstrikes when talks stalled. A similar pattern unfolded with NATO, where initial threats of U.S. withdrawal over insufficient defense spending led to extensive negotiations, and at last week's NATO meeting, an agreement by European countries to increase their defense spending to 5% of gross domestic product, a significant concession that Trump subsequently lauded. The reshaping of the global trading system also followed this blueprint, commencing with dramatically higher tariffs globally before an openness to bilateral negotiations emerged. The situation involving Russia and Ukraine presents a more complex yet consistent application of this model. Washington's stated readiness to reduce support for Kyiv served as an initial shock designed to ease Moscow's anxieties and signal a U.S. openness to a settlement, potentially at Ukraine's expense. Russian President Vladimir Putin, according to Friedman, perceived Trump's indifference to Ukraine's future and hostility towards NATO as an opportunity to improve his military position. However, the recent reconciliation with NATO, marked by the collective commitment to increased defense spending, has introduced a new dynamic. This shift, driven by a mutual fear of Russian aggression among NATO members and Moscow's fear of a united alliance, could now compel Putin into the negotiations Trump initially sought. Friedman argues that this approach, which turns conventions on their head by introducing shock and uncertainty as a basis for diplomacy, is demonstrably emerging as a coherent if unconventional foreign policy. This peace through strength doctrine is described by Kyron Skinner in an opinion piece for Fox News, frames Trump's actions as part of a deliberate, grand strategy aimed at prioritizing American interests and correcting what she terms the flawed designs of previous presidents. Skinner asserts that Trump's calculated strikes against Iranian uranium enrichment facilities were not acts of warmongering but rather strategic moves designed to send dual messages: first, a clear signal of America's support for allies like Israel, and second, a reiteration of his preference for diplomacy. She highlights that military force was employed only when Iran showed disinterest in negotiations, and that subsequent efforts for a ceasefire between Israel and Iran underscore a commitment to peace. Skinner draws a parallel to President Ronald Reagan, suggesting Trump is a peace strategist who puts his country first while extending cooperation to those with shared goals. The commitment from NATO to increase defense spending to 5% of GDP is presented as further evidence of this doctrine's comprehensive impact. Yet this assertive diplomatic style has prompted a distinct response from U.S. allies, often characterized by a delicate balance of flattery and caution, as detailed in an ELPAS English report. During the recent NATO summit in The Hague, European leaders prioritized keeping President Donald Trump happy, even at the expense of their own dignity. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte's public praise for Trump and his widely noted use of the term daddy exemplify this approach. Sylvia Ayuso and Macarena Vidal-Lai report that this flattery diplomacy is not new, citing French President Emmanuel Macron's impressive 2017 Bastille Day military parade and the various overtures from world leaders and even wealthy businessmen like Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk. Former U.S. diplomat Ian Lesser observes that Trump seems to view the world above all through the lens of personality and personal interactions, leading to a confusing environment for leaders. This has led to lavish gifts such as Qatar's reported gift of a $400 million luxury Boeing to Trump intended for use as Air Force One. However, critics like former National Security Advisor John Bolton argue Trump seeks vassalage rather than loyalty, leading to public humiliation for those who fail to comply, as seen with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez. While some like British Prime Minister Keir Starmer and Mark Rutte have secured favorable outcomes through this approach, the report also highlights its inherent fragility. Comfort Arrow, president of the International Crisis Group, suggests that while flattery can work, Trump also respects leaders who stand their ground and that the worst outcome is objecting loudly but doing nothing about it. The experience of South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, whose attempts at flattery failed to deter Trump's accusations regarding white farmer genocide, underscores the unpredictable nature of this approach. Brazilian political scientist Oliver Stuhnkel warns that it doesn't generate trust or predictability in the medium term, as it depends more on the mood of a single person than on lasting institutional agreements. Amidst these complex diplomatic maneuvers, American public opinion appears to largely support President Trump's foreign policy actions. A national survey conducted by American Pulse Research in polling between June 23 to 25, immediately following the U.S. airstrikes on Iranian nuclear facilities and the subsequent ceasefire, revealed solid approval ratings. 56% of Americans approved of Trump's efforts to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons, with 54% specifically supporting the airstrikes. The poll also indicated a favorable shift in perception for 51% of respondents due to his actions. Dustin Olson, managing partner of American Pulse, notes that Americans recognized and rewarded Trump's dual-track strategy of applying pressure while keeping the door open for negotiations. A significant 71% of voters across the political spectrum believe Iran would use a nuclear weapon if it acquired one, underscoring public understanding of the high stakes. Furthermore, 48% believe that the strikes and ceasefire will deter adversaries, suggesting a majority believes the peace through strength policy is effective in making America safer and that Trump means business. The confluence of these analyses paints a picture of a distinctive and impactful U.S. foreign policy. President Trump's second term has solidified a diplomatic model characterized by initial high-stakes demands, a readiness to employ significant leverage, a highly personalized engagement with world leaders, and a subsequent pivot to negotiation, often after dramatic displays of resolve. While this approach has yielded concrete results such as increased NATO defense spending and a temporary ceasefire with Iran, it has also introduced considerable uncertainty and, for many allies, a challenging diplomatic environment. The long-term implications of this shock and awe diplomacy, its sustainability and its ability to foster lasting international stability, remain subjects of intense global observation and debate.